Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something pretty relevant, I think. Algorithmic discrimination in the age of AI. We've got a whole bunch of sources for this one: articles, legal analyses, even some real-world examples, and we're going to try to break it all down for you.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area, because we're really seeing this clash between like the incredible potential of AI,
Yeah.
but also, the very real risks that it could, make existing societal biases even worse.
Right, and to add to that, I mean, here in Europe, we've got two major pieces of legislation that kind of play into this whole thing. So we've got the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. That's all about protecting your personal data, keeping it safe. And then you've got this new one, the AI Act, which is really aiming to make sure that AI is developed and used in an ethical way.
And it's interesting, because both of these pieces of legislation are aiming for good, obviously. But they seem to clash a bit when it comes to tackling this, algorithmic bias. The AI Act actually proposes using sensitive personal data, like your race or your health information, to try and detect and reduce bias in high-risk AI systems.
So using potentially biased data to fight bias, it seems a little counterintuitive, right?
It does, yeah, and that's exactly where this conflict with the GDPR comes in. Because the GDPR has all these rules about using this kind of sensitive information. Unless there's like a really, really good reason, it's basically off limits.
And I think it's important for everyone listening to really think about what this means in real life. We're not just talking about some abstract legal debate. These algorithms are already being used out there in the world, and they can have a big impact on your life. Think about it. Job applications that are being screened by AI, loans that are approved or denied based on some algorithm, or even just everyday things like self-driving cars that are using AI.
Absolutely. And I mean, imagine a self-driving car and its algorithm is somehow better at detecting pedestrians with, lighter skin tones.
Yeah.
Or think about a hiring algorithm that unknowingly favors certain genders. These aren't just hypothetical situations. These are real concerns that people are trying to deal with.
It is kind of unsettling to think about these biases that are often unconscious ending up in these systems that are supposed to be objective, based on data. So let's unpack this a bit. How's the AI Act trying to tackle this? You mentioned earlier it uses a risk-based approach, focusing on high-risk systems.
Yeah. So basically, the AI Act puts AI systems into different categories based on, how much impact they could potentially have. And systems that are considered high risk, like those used in healthcare, law enforcement, or financial systems, those face much stricter requirements.
Okay, and so this is where Article 10 of the AI Act comes in.
It's exactly. Article 10.5 basically creates this, kind of exception. It says that it's okay to use special categories of personal data, which is their term for, sensitive stuff like race, religion, health data. That it's okay to use this to find and then correct bias in these high-risk systems.
So it's like they're acknowledging that, yeah, we kind of need to use this data, even if it feels a little icky. But then we have the GDPR, which seems to be a lot stricter about protecting all this sensitive information.
Right. The GDPR is very clear that using these special categories of personal data is generally not allowed, unless, there's some very specific conditions are met. So that creates this sort of dilemma. Can we really try to fight discrimination in AI systems without, in some way going against those privacy rights that the GDPR is meant to protect?
Yeah, it's like we're stuck. We want to make sure AI is fair, but also people have a right to privacy. So how do we make this work? Well, our sources point to this substantial public interest exception in the GDPR as a possible way forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because this exception is basically saying that processing sensitive data might be allowed, but only if it's absolutely necessary for, something that's really important for the public good.
So if you could prove that using this data is like the only way to make sure high-risk AI systems are fair, the GDPR might be okay with it.
That's what some experts are saying, but it's definitely not that simple. Even if this exception does apply, there are still a bunch of really strict conditions that would need to be met.
Like what kind of conditions?
Well, we're talking about things like really strong cybersecurity, to prevent any data breaches, and very strict limits on how much data is collected and for how long it's kept, and constant oversight to make sure that using this sensitive information is absolutely necessary to achieve fairness. It can't just be, an easy way out. It has to be truly essential.
So trying to balance all these different interests is incredibly complex. But what really stands out to me is that we're only talking about these specific categories of data, the ones that the GDPR calls special categories. What about all that other information that might not fall under that strict definition, but could still be used for discrimination?
That's a really important point, because discrimination doesn't always fit neatly into those specific categories of sensitive data. And this is where things get really tricky.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, think about something like your zip code. Now, it doesn't seem like sensitive information, right? Just where you live. But let's say you have an algorithm that's used to decide who gets a loan, and it's been trained on data that shows a link between certain zip codes and people defaulting on loans. Well, that algorithm could then discriminate against anyone living in those areas, even if things like their race or income aren't even considered.
So we're talking about everyday information that suddenly becomes a way to discriminate when it's being used by an algorithm.
Exactly. And the problem is that the rules about processing this kind of data under the GDPR are actually more relaxed than for those special categories. It's not explicitly forbidden, but it could still cause harm.
This definitely feels like we're getting into a very gray area, both legally and ethically.
Absolutely, and that's why this whole conversation about algorithmic discrimination is so important. We really need to understand the nuances, the potential problems, and how seemingly harmless information can be used in unfair ways.
So where do we go from here? It feels like we've identified a lot of complexity, but we haven't really figured out how to fix it. What are some of the solutions, or at least steps in the right direction?
Yeah, I think the first step is recognizing the problem, which I think we've done a good job of today. We've seen how AI, for all its potential, can also make bias worse. And we've looked at how legislation like the GDPR and the AI Act are trying to deal with this. But there are still so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone listening, it's important to understand that this isn't just a problem for lawmakers and tech companies to figure out. This is something we all need to be aware of and engaged in because ultimately these algorithms are shaping our lives, whether we realize it or not.
You know, one of the key takeaways from all of our research is that we really need more clarity in this legal landscape. Both the GDPR and the AI Act, they're incredibly complex, lots of legal jargon, and there's a lot of room for different interpretations, especially when it comes to this intersection of AI and discrimination.
So we need clearer guidelines on how to balance that push for innovation from the AI Act with the GDPR's focus on data protection.
Exactly. It's like we need lawmakers and regulators to draw some clear lines, to give some real-world examples of what's okay and what's not okay when it comes to using personal data to address algorithmic bias.
Because right now it feels like we're in this murky, uncertain territory where everyone's just kind of trying to figure things out as they go. And that's not a good place to be when we're talking about something as important as fairness and equality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to move past this reactive approach, where we just wait for problems to happen and then scramble to fix them.
Right.
We need proactive, forward-thinking regulation that can anticipate the challenges of AI and sets really clear expectations for developers, companies, even individuals.
So what would that look like? Are we talking about updating the GDPR itself? Or maybe issuing more detailed guidance from regulatory bodies? Or could we even rely on court cases to sort of set precedents?
It could be all of those things, really. Updating the GDPR to specifically address the challenges of AI would be huge. And having more detailed guidance from regulators with real-world examples and best practices, that would be incredibly valuable. And of course, court cases as they come up will definitely play a role in shaping how these laws are interpreted and applied.
It sounds like a pretty big task, overhauling these legal frameworks.
It is, but it's a necessary one. And it's important to remember that this isn't just about Europe. These conversations about AI and discrimination are happening all over the world, and the solutions we come up with here could have a much wider impact.
So this is about setting a standard, not just for Europe, but for everyone, on how to develop and use AI responsibly. But legal frameworks are only part of the solution, right? What else needs to happen to really address this effectively?
Well, one of the most pressing things, as we've talked about, is broadening our understanding of what actually counts as sensitive data in the age of AI. We can't just rely on those predefined special categories because, as we've seen, discrimination can happen based on data points that don't seem sensitive at all.
Right, so it's not enough to just say, okay, we've protected race, religion, health data, we're good. Because bias can sneak in through those cracks, through data that we might not even think twice about.
Exactly. We need a more holistic approach to data privacy, one that takes context into account. We have to understand how different pieces of data can be combined to create profiles that could lead to discrimination, even if no single piece of data on its own would be considered a problem.
It feels like we're always playing catch up, trying to understand what these technologies mean as they're being developed and used. And it's such a fast moving field, it's a constant race to stay ahead.
It is, and that's why these conversations are so important. We need to bring these issues to light, and we need to involve a lot of different people in finding solutions. We need experts from all kinds of fields, data scientists, ethicists, legal scholars, policymakers, all working together to create a framework for responsible AI development.
Sounds like a massive collaborative effort is needed to tackle something this complex. But beyond the legal and technical stuff, there's also a human element to this, right? How do we change the mindset, the culture in the tech industry and beyond to make sure AI is being developed and used ethically?
That's a really important point. It goes beyond just checking boxes and following rules. We need to build a culture of responsibility where developers are really thinking about the potential impact of what they create, where companies care about fairness and ethics as much as they care about making money, and where individuals have the power to understand and challenge algorithmic bias.
So this isn't just about rules and regulations, it's about changing the way we think about AI altogether, acknowledging that it can be used for both good and bad, and making sure that human values are at the center of it all.
Absolutely, and that's where education and awareness are so vital. We need to give people the knowledge and tools to understand how these algorithms work, to recognize when there's bias, and to demand better from the systems that are increasingly shaping their lives.
It's about empowering people to be active participants in this AI revolution, not just passive recipients of whatever technology throws their way. But how do we actually do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, one of the most powerful tools we have is transparency. We need to make AI less mysterious, to show people how these algorithms work, what data they're trained on, and how they make decisions.
So no more black boxes, no more just trust us, the algorithm knows best.
Exactly. We need to be able to explain these systems, to check them for bias, and to hold the people who create and use them accountable.
That level of transparency seems so important, not just to build trust, but also to create a sense of shared responsibility. If we can understand how these systems work, we can start to have meaningful conversations about how to improve them, how to make sure they're serving us, not the other way around.
And those conversations need to happen everywhere, from the classrooms where the next generation of AI developers are learning to the boardrooms where decisions about AI are being made.
Because at the end of the day, the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're creating right now. With every line of code we write, every investment we make, every policy we choose. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of future do we want to create?
It's a question that deserves all our attention. And I think the more we understand the nuances of this issue, the complexities of algorithmic bias, the better equipped we'll be to make smart choices that lead to a more just and equitable future.
A future where AI is used to empower people, to break down barriers, and to create opportunities, not to perpetuate the inequalities of the past.
And those conversations need to happen everywhere. Yeah. From the classrooms where the next generation of AI developers are learning to the boardrooms where decisions about AI are being made.
Because ultimately, the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're creating right now with every line of code we write, every investment we make, every policy we choose. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of future do we want to create?
It's a question that deserves all our attention. And I think the more we understand the nuances of this issue, the complexities of algorithmic bias, the better equipped we'll be to make smart choices that lead to a more just and equitable future.
A future where AI is used to empower people, to break down barriers, and to create opportunities, not to perpetuate the inequalities of the past. It feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We really have. We've explored that complex relationship between AI, algorithmic bias, and the laws that are supposed to protect you from discrimination.
We've talked about how even data that seems harmless can be used by algorithms in ways that lead to unfair outcomes.
And we've stressed how important it is to have more transparency, clearer guidelines, and a more proactive approach to shaping the future of AI.
But I think one of the biggest takeaways from today is that this isn't just a technical or legal issue, it's a human issue.
It really is.
Right.
It's about making sure that the technologies we create reflect our values, our commitment to fairness, and our desire to build a society where everyone has an equal chance to succeed.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to think about.
Imagine you're in charge of updating the GDPR or the AI Act to better address this problem of algorithmic discrimination.
What would you focus on? Would it be strengthening data protection?
Or would you put more emphasis on making AI systems transparent and explainable?
There's no right or wrong answer. But it's so important to grapple with these questions as we move forward in this rapidly changing world of technology.
The decisions we make today will have a huge impact on the future of AI and how it affects all our lives.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
Because you have a voice in creating a future where AI is a force for good, not a source of discrimination.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
And those conversations need to happen everywhere, from classrooms where the next generation of AI developers are learning, to the boardrooms where decisions about AI are being made.
It feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We really have. We've explored this, complicated relationship between AI, algorithmic bias, and the laws that are meant to protect you from discrimination.
We've talked about how even data that seems harmless can be used by algorithms to create unfair outcomes.
And we've highlighted how crucial it is to have more transparency, clearer guidelines, and just be more proactive when it comes to shaping the future of AI.
But one of the biggest takeaways for me is that this isn't just a technical problem or a legal problem, it's a human problem.
Yeah, it really is. It's about making sure that the technology we create reflects our values, reflects our commitment to fairness and to building a society where everyone has an equal chance to succeed.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Imagine you were tasked with updating the GDPR, or the AI Act, to better address algorithmic discrimination. What would be your top priority?
Would you focus on strengthening data protection?
Or would you prioritize making AI systems more transparent and explainable?
There's no easy answer, but it's so important to consider these questions as we, navigate this rapidly changing world of technology.
Absolutely. The decisions we make today will have a huge impact on the future of AI and how it affects our lives.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
Because you have a voice in creating a future where AI is a force for good, not a source of discrimination.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.